The Ghost Prison. This story is true, every word of it. It happened to me during the rainy season of 2019 on a road that has no name in a place that exists on no map. I have spent 5 years trying to convince myself it was a nightmare, a collective hallucination born from fear and alcohol and the darkness of a Mexican highway at 2 in the morning. But nightmares fade. This is not faded. It lives in my bones, in the scar tissue of my memory, in the way I still cannot sleep when rain hits my window after midnight. If you are listening to this, I need you to believe me. Not because I want sympathy, not because I need validation, but because there are places in this world that once you enter them, you never truly leave. And if my story can stop even one person from making the same mistake I did, then maybe the weight I carry will mean something. What happened that night changed everything I thought I knew about myself, about friendship, about the limits of human morality when survival becomes the only currency that matters. I walked into that darkness as one person and walked out as someone else entirely. Someone I still do not recognize when I look in the mirror. Someone who made a choice that cannot be unmade no matter how many years pass or how many times I close my eyes and wish it had been different. My name is Mateo. I was 22 years old when this happened, living with my family in a neighborhood near Estadio Azteca in the south of Mexico City, 22. That age when you believe you are immortal, when consequences are abstract concepts that happen to other people, older people, people who made worse decisions than you ever would. I had a part-time job at a print shop, enough money to pay for drinks on weekends, but never enough to save. I had just spent nearly my entire paycheck on a pair of sneakers I did not need but desperately wanted. I had a sister named Lucia, 3 years older, who somehow ended up running in the same circles as me despite our age difference. And I had Carolina. Carolina was not my girlfriend. She was not even aware, I think, of how I felt about her. She was a friend of my sister, dark-haired and quick to laugh, with eyes that caught light in a way that made my chest tight whenever she looked at me. I had known her for 8 months and had not once managed to tell her anything meaningful. Fear of rejection, I suppose. Fear of ruining what little connection we had. Fear of being seen as the awkward younger brother who could not keep up with the crowd. That fear defined me more than I understood at the time. It made me a follower instead of a leader. It made me the kind of person who went along with things rather than questioning them. It made me the kind of person who would stay silent when speaking up might have changed everything. Our group was a tangled web of relationships that had formed over countless weekend parties. Rodrigo and Valentina had been together for almost 2 years. He was loud, confident, the kind of guy who walked into rooms expecting attention and usually getting it. She was quieter, more calculating, with a sharpness in her gaze that suggested she was always thinking 3 steps ahead. My best friend Tomas had recently started dating one of Lucia's co-workers, which pulled him deeper into our social orbit. And then there was me, perpetually single, perpetually on the edges, watching couples pair off while I nursed drinks and pretended I did not mind being alone. The website Lucia subscribed to posted party announcements every Thursday. Underground events mostly. Abandoned warehouses turned into temporary nightclubs. Empty lots transformed into open-air raves. Houses whose owners had left for vacation rented out illegally for a single night of bass-heavy music and cheap alcohol. We had been to dozens of them over the past year. Nothing bad had ever happened. A few hangovers, a few arguments. Once Rodrigo got into a shoving match with a stranger over a spilled drink, but nothing serious. Nothing that suggested the universe was keeping score, waiting for the right moment to collect. The party that weekend was in Cuernavaca, about 85 kilometers south of the city. The Eternal Spring City, people called it. Warm weather year-round, cheaper drinks than the capital, and a reputation for wildness that drew young people like moths to flames. None of us had cars. We never did. Transportation was always the obstacle, the thing that kept us tethered to locations we could reach by metro or bus. But that week, Rodrigo's father left for a business trip to Guadalajara, and he left behind his truck. It was a Ford F-150 old but reliable with a covered bed in the back that could fit 7 people if they did not mind sitting on the floor. Rodrigo's father had hidden the keys, of course. Parents always hide keys when they leave vehicles behind. But Rodrigo found them in a sock drawer within 20 minutes of his father's departure. He messaged the group chat that same afternoon with an invitation that felt at the time like a gift from the universe. 10 of us agreed to go. Rodrigo would drive with Valentina in the passenger seat, and Lucia squeezed between them. The rest of us would ride in the back, surrounded by backpacks and jackets and bottles wrapped in cloth to keep them from clinking. I remember hesitating when I saw the message, not because I sensed danger. I did not believe in premonitions, then did not trust the whispers of intuition that sometimes rose unbidden in my chest. I hesitated because I had almost no money. 50 pesos in my wallet, barely enough for a meal, certainly not enough for a night of drinking in another city. Lucia dismissed my concerns with the casual confidence of someone who had never let poverty stop her from having fun. Free ride, she said, free drinks if we knew the right people. What was there to worry about? And Carolina was going. That detail, delivered almost as an afterthought, sealed my decision. I would go. I would find a way to make 50 pesos last. I would spend the night near Carolina and maybe finally find the courage to say something real. We gathered at Rodrigo's house at 7 in the evening. The sky was clear, then a few distant clouds painted orange by the setting sun. Nothing threatening, nothing that suggested the storm waiting for us on the other side of midnight. I climbed into the truck bed with Thomas, Carolina, and 4 others whose names I will not mention because they left the party before the nightmare began. The metal floor was cold through my jeans. The air smelled of motor oil and the faint sweetness of someone's perfume. Rodrigo started the engine, and we lurched forward into what I believed would be the best night of my summer. The drive took 3 hours. We stopped once for gas, once for someone to use a bathroom at a roadside convenience store. I sat with my back against the wheel, knees drawn up, watching Carolina through the dim light that filtered through the canvas cover. She was talking to Thomas about something I could not hear over the engine noise, laughing at intervals, her teeth white in the shadows. I wanted to move closer. I wanted to insert myself into their conversation to make her laugh the way Thomas was making her laugh, but I did not. I stayed where I was silent, watching, telling myself that later there would be time. We arrived in Cuernavaca just after 10. The party was in an abandoned villa on the outskirts of the city, a once grand estate that had fallen into disrepair and been claimed by the underground scene. Crumbling walls surrounded a courtyard strung with Christmas lights. A DJ booth made from wooden pallets pumped bass into the humid air. Bodies moved in the darkness, hundreds of them, silhouettes grinding against each other beneath strobing colors. The smell hit me first. Sweat and cheap cologne and something botanical, maybe marijuana, maybe just the tropical plants that had overgrown the garden. The sound hit me second. Bass so deep I felt it in my molars and the spaces between my ribs sinking with my heartbeat until I could not tell where the music ended and my body began. I drank more than I should have. We all did. Someone handed me a cup of something sweet and strong, and I did not ask what was in it. I just drank. Then another cup. Then another. Carolina danced near me at one point close enough that I could smell her shampoo, and I almost said something, almost reached for her hand. But the music swelled, someone bumped into us, and the moment passed. She drifted toward the bar with Lucia, and I let her go, telling myself there would be other moments. There would be time. Around 11, the lights in the villa flickered, 3 times in quick succession like a dying heartbeat. Someone near the DJ booth shouted that it was just the generator, that these old places always had electrical problems. People laughed. The music continued. But I felt something then, a coldness in my stomach that had nothing to do with the drinks. A sensation like someone had walked over my grave. I looked around, scanning the crowd for anything wrong, anything that might explain the sudden unease crawling up my spine. I saw nothing but dancing bodies and flashing lights. I told myself it was paranoia, told myself to relax, told myself that nothing bad was going to happen. At 1:20 in the morning, Valentina's phone rang. I was standing near the bar when I saw her face change. The color drained from her cheeks in seconds, replaced by a grayish pallor that made her look suddenly older, suddenly fragile. She pressed the phone to her ear, said a few words I could not hear, then pushed through the crowd toward Rodrigo. I watched them argue, their mouths moving fast, their hands gesturing urgently. Then Rodrigo found me. His eyes were bloodshot, his speech slightly slurred, but the message was clear. Valentina's grandmother had collapsed. Stroke maybe, heart attack. The details were unclear. What was clear was that she was in a hospital in Mexico City asking for her granddaughter, and Valentina needed to leave immediately, which meant we all needed to leave because Rodrigo was our only ride, and he was not about to abandon his girlfriend in a crisis. 4 people chose to stay behind. They had met others at the party, found alternative transportation, decided the night was too good to end early. I envied them as I watched them wave goodbye. They would sleep in Cuernavaca, wake to sunshine and hangovers, and return to the city on a bus the next afternoon. They would never know what waited for us on the road home. 6 of us climbed back into the truck, Rodrigo behind the wheel, Valentina beside him crying softly, her phone clutched like a lifeline. Lucia in the middle, her face tight with worry. And in the back, Thomas, Carolina, and me, sitting on the cold metal floor surrounded by the remnants of our abandoned celebration. Half-empty bottles, someone's forgotten jacket, the smell of spilled beer mixing with the first drops of rain beginning to patter against the canvas. We left the party at 1:35. I remember the exact time because I checked my phone, some instinct telling me to mark the moment. The sky had changed while we were inside. Clouds had rolled in thick and black, swallowing the stars like a hungry mouth. Lightning flickered in the distance, silent and pale. The air tasted different now, heavy, electric. Like the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. 15 minutes into the drive, the rain began in earnest. Not a drizzle, not a gentle shower. A deluge, water hammering against the canvas, finding every gap and seam dripping onto our heads and shoulders. The truck slowed as visibility dropped to almost nothing. Through the small window connecting the bed to the cabin, I heard Valentina urging Rodrigo to hurry, and I heard Rodrigo snapping back that he was going as fast as he could without killing us all. Then came the decision that sealed our fate. Rodrigo announced through the window that he was taking the Carretera Libre, the free road, instead of the toll highway. His reasoning made sense at the time. He had been drinking. He was afraid of checkpoints, afraid of being stopped by police who would smell the alcohol on his breath and arrest him on the spot. The free road had no checkpoints, no tolls, no cameras. Just empty asphalt winding through mountains and forests, dark and unpatrolled. I wanted to object. The words formed in my throat solid and urgent. The free road at night in a storm with a drunk driver. Every instinct I had screamed that this was wrong. But I looked at Carolina, her face pale in the dim light, and I thought about what an objection would mean. A fight, a delay, maybe being stranded at the side of the highway while Rodrigo and I argued about safety. So I swallowed my objection. I told myself it would be fine. Rodrigo had driven drunk before. We had all survived worse decisions. The truck turned onto the free road at exactly 2:00 a.m. The pavement was rougher here, pitted with potholes that sent jolts through the suspension. Trees pressed close on either side, their branches reaching toward us like skeletal fingers. The headlights cut a narrow tunnel through the darkness, illuminating maybe 30 meters of road before dissolving into black. Behind us there was nothing. Ahead there was nothing. We had entered a void. I felt the unease then sharper than before, a prickling at the back of my neck like someone was watching. I turned to look behind us, peering through the gap in the canvas, and saw only darkness. No other cars, no lights. Just the rain and the night and the endless trees. But the sensation did not fade. If anything, it grew stronger, settling into my bones like a chill that no amount of movement could shake. Carolina felt it too. I could tell by the way she hugged herself, by the way her eyes kept darting toward the darkness outside. When our gazes met, she did not smile. She just looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Something between confusion and fear. At 2:15, I saw the lights behind us. Headlights gaining fast, flashing urgently. Then the unmistakable pulse of emergency lights, red and blue, cutting through the rain like wounds in the darkness. A siren wailed, distant at first, then closer, then deafening. Rodrigo slowed the truck, and I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. Police. We were being pulled over. Rodrigo would be arrested. The truck would be impounded. We would have to call our parents, confess everything, endure the consequences. But at least we would be safe. At least we would be found. The truck stopped at the side of the road. Rain drummed against the canvas. The siren cut off, leaving only the hiss of water and the thump of my heart. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. A knock on the driver's window, Rodrigo rolling it down. A voice, calm and cold, asking for documents. I could not see the man's face from where I sat. Only his silhouette in the rearview mirror, tall and thin, illuminated from behind by the patrol car's lights. But something about his shape was wrong. His proportions were off his head, too narrow, his shoulders too angular. When he moved, it was with a mechanical precision that reminded me of a marionette being guided by invisible strings. Valentina began to explain about her grandmother. Her voice cracked, desperate pleading. The man said nothing for a long moment. Then he spoke again, and his words reached me through the rain like ice sliding down my spine. Follow me. Not to a police station, not to any place with lights or people or the machinery of civilization. He said nothing about where we were going. Just those two words, delivered without inflection, without humanity. Follow me. And Rodrigo, because he was scared, because he was drunk, because he did not know what else to do, put the truck in gear and followed. As we pulled back onto the road, I looked at Carolina. Her hand found mine in the darkness, cold and trembling. I wanted to tell her it would be okay. I wanted to believe it myself. But somewhere deep in my chest, in the place where truth lives, even when we refuse to acknowledge it, I knew. I knew we were not being taken to safety. I knew the lights behind us did not belong to any police force. I knew that whatever waited at the end of this road, it was not something we would survive unchanged. Some doors once opened can never be closed. And we were about to walk through one. The road had no name. I know this because I looked for one. Every time we passed a junction, every time a smaller path branched off into the darkness, I searched for signs, for markers, for any indication that we were still in a world that had been mapped and measured and claimed by civilization. There was nothing, just trees and rain and the tail lights of the sedan ahead of us, glowing red like the eyes of something waiting to feed. We followed for 40 minutes. 40 minutes that felt like hours, that felt like days, that felt like we had somehow slipped outside of time itself, and were now moving through a space where clocks meant nothing and distance was measured only in dread. The road grew narrower with each kilometer, the pavement giving way to gravel, the gravel giving way to mud. Potholes appeared without warning, jarring the truck so violently that I bit my tongue twice and tasted copper. Branches scraped against the canvas cover like fingernails, dragging across fabric, reaching for us, trying to tear their way inside. No one spoke. Valentina had stopped crying. Lucia sat rigid between her and Rodrigo, her face visible through the small window, pale and frozen. In the back, Tomas pressed himself against the wheel, his eyes fixed on nothing. Carolina still held my hand, her grip so tight. I could feel her pulse against my palm, rapid and irregular, the heartbeat of a hunted animal. I wanted to say something reassuring. I wanted to tell her we would be fine, but the words would not come. They died somewhere in my throat, strangled by the same instinct that was screaming at me to run, to jump from the moving truck, to take my chances in the forest, rather than continue toward whatever waited at the end of this road. The prison appeared without warning. One moment there was only darkness ahead. The next, the sedan's headlights swept across a structure that should not have existed. Walls of raw brick unpainted and crumbling. Windows that gaped like empty eye sockets, their glass long since shattered or stolen. Iron bars visible behind some of the openings rusted to the color of dried blood. A gate hung crooked on its hinges, half open, revealing a courtyard overgrown with weeds that had pushed through cracks in the concrete. It was not large. 3 buildings arranged in a U-shape around the central yard, maybe 15 cells total. The kind of place that might have held petty criminals or political prisoners in some forgotten decade. But size did not matter. What mattered was the feeling that washed over me as we approached a sensation of wrongness so profound that my skin crawled and my stomach clenched, and every hair on my body stood at attention. This place was not abandoned. It was waiting. The sedan stopped. Its headlights died. For a moment there was only darkness and rain. Then the man stepped out. I saw him clearly for the first time as he walked toward our truck, illuminated by our own headlights. Tall, impossibly thin. His face was long and narrow, the proportions somehow wrong, like a photograph that had been stretched vertically. His eyes were set deep in their sockets, shadowed even in direct light, reflecting nothing. He wore dark clothes, no uniform, no badge, nothing to identify him as any kind of authority. Just black fabric clinging to his skeletal frame, soaked through by the rain. He stopped beside Rodrigo's window and stood there waiting. Rodrigo rolled down the window. His hands were shaking. I could see them trembling against the steering wheel knuckles, white fingers refusing to obey. The man did not speak immediately. He simply looked at Rodrigo, then past him at Valentina and Lucia, then somehow at us in the back. Even though the angle should have made it impossible, his gaze found me through the small window, held me for a heartbeat, and in that moment I felt something I had never felt before. Recognition, not mine of him, his of me. As if he had been expecting me specifically, as if my presence here was not an accident, but an appointment I had made long ago and forgotten. "Out," he said. His voice was flat, toneless, like words generated by a machine that had never heard human speech. "All of you." Valentina started to protest. Her grandmother, she said. The hospital. "Please," she said. "We need to go." The man's head tilted slightly, a movement that reminded me of a bird examining something small and edible. Then he reached into his waistband and produced a gun. Small, black. It caught the light in a way that made it look almost liquid, almost alive. He pointed it at the sky and fired. The sound was enormous, a crack of thunder that split the night and sent birds screaming from the surrounding trees. My ears rang. Carolina screamed. In the front seat, Lucia began to cry. The man lowered the gun and spoke again, the same flat tone, the same mechanical delivery. "Out, now." We obeyed. There was no discussion, no debate. We simply did as we were told, climbing from the truck on legs that barely functioned, stumbling into the rain and the mud and the shadow of the prison. I helped Carolina down from the bed, my hands numb, my mind struggling to process what was happening. This was not real. This could not be real. Things like this happened in movies and news reports about other people in other places, not to 22-year-olds from Mexico City who just wanted to go to a party and maybe talk to a girl. The man herded us toward the gate. His gun never wavered, never pointed directly at any of us, but its presence was enough. We walked in a tight cluster, shoulders touching, seeking whatever comfort proximity could provide. The courtyard was worse up close. The concrete was stained with something dark, in places patches that the rain had not been able to wash away. The weeds growing through the cracks were thick and pale, starved of sunlight, reaching toward us as we passed like hands begging for something we could not give. Inside, the smell hit me first. Mold and decay and standing water, and something else beneath it all, something sweet and rotten that I recognized instinctively, even though I had never encountered it before. The smell of death, not fresh death, old death. Death that had been here so long it had soaked into the walls, into the floor, into the very air we were now breathing. The man led us down a corridor lined with cells. 3 on each side, their doors hanging open, their interiors lost in shadow. The ceiling was low, oppressive, dripping with moisture that fell on our heads and shoulders like cold fingers. The floor was slick with water and mud and things I did not want to identify. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, something dripped with a rhythm that sounded almost like breathing. He stopped at the cell in the middle of the row and gestured with the gun. In. We filed inside, 5 of us, pressing into a space meant for 2 at most. The cell was perhaps 3 meters by 2, with a concrete platform that might once have served as a bed and a hole in the floor that had been a toilet. The walls were covered in markings, scratches, and carvings that I could barely see in the dim light filtering through the barred window. Rodrigo did not follow us in. The man grabbed his arm, held him back, and for a moment I thought he was going to shoot him right there in front of us. But instead he dragged Rodrigo toward the cell at the end of the corridor, threw him inside, and slammed the door shut. Then he turned and walked away. His footsteps echoed through the corridor, slow and deliberate. A door creaked open somewhere. An engine started. Headlights swept across the walls, visible through the barred window, and then faded into the distance. We were alone. The first thing I did was check my phone. The screen glowed to life, familiar and reassuring, but the signal indicator showed nothing. No bars, no service, not even the ghost of a connection. I held the phone up, moved it around the cell, pressed it against the bars of the window. Nothing. Lucia checked hers. Same result. Tomas, Carolina. Valentina, who had somehow kept hold of her phone through everything. All the same, no signal, no way to call for help, no way to tell anyone where we were because we did not know where we were because we had followed a man with no name down a road with no markers to a prison that should not exist. The darkness seemed to thicken as the reality of our situation settled over us. We were trapped, locked in a cell in an abandoned prison in the middle of nowhere with no transportation, no communication, and no idea if anyone would ever think to look for us here. Valentina's grandmother was dying in a hospital bed, and Valentina was dying too in a different way, her hope draining out of her with every second that passed. Thomas tried the bars. He grabbed them with both hands, planted his feet, and pulled with all his strength. The metal groaned but did not move. He tried again, then began kicking at the door where it met the frame. The sound was enormous in the enclosed space, echoing down the corridor, and coming back to us distorted, multiplied like a dozen people were kicking a dozen doors somewhere in the darkness. "Stop," I said. "Someone will hear." He looked at me, his face twisted with fear and frustration. "Good," he said. "I want someone to hear. I want someone to come." But no one came. The sound faded. The silence returned. And with it came something else. I noticed it first as an absence. The rain had not stopped. I could still hear it drumming against the roof, but there was a gap in the sound now, a pocket of quiet directly outside our cell that seemed to swallow noise rather than produce it. I moved toward the bars, trying to see into the corridor, and that was when I heard the breathing. Slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere close, but impossible to pinpoint, not from any of us. Our breathing was rapid and shallow, the breathing of terrified animals. This was something else, deep and measured, the rhythm of something that had been waiting for a very long time and was in no hurry now that its wait was over. "Do you hear that?" Carolina whispered. I nodded. I could not speak. The breathing continued, growing neither louder nor softer, maintaining its terrible consistency. Then it stopped, and in the silence that followed I heard something worse, laughter, low and dry like wind passing through hollow bones. It came from the end of the corridor, from the direction of Rodrigo's cell, but also from somewhere else, somewhere behind us, somewhere that should have been solid wall. It surrounded us, filled the cell, pressed against my eardrums, until I wanted to scream just to drown it out. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than before, weighted with expectation. I realized I was holding my breath. Everyone was. 5 people frozen in a prison cell, waiting for something to happen, praying that nothing would. Valentina was the first to move. She walked to the back of the cell where her purse had somehow ended up during our confinement and bent to pick it up. Then she stopped. "I did not put this here," she said. Her voice was strange, flat, like the words were being pulled from her against her will. I looked at where she was pointing. Her purse sat in the corner beneath the concrete platform in a spot that was impossible to reach without crawling. None of us had moved since entering the cell. None of us had touched her things. "I put it by the door," she continued. "When we came in, I put it by the door." No one answered. There was nothing to say. The purse had moved by itself, from one side of the cell to the other, while we were all watching the corridor, while we were all listening to the breathing and the laughter and the silence that was somehow worse than both. I turned on my phone's flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, harsh and white, illuminating details I'd not been able to see before. The scratches on the walls were not random. They were words, names and dates and messages carved into the concrete by fingernails and stones and whatever else the previous occupants had been able to find. Maria Elena, 15 Agosto, 2019. Dios me perdón. Carlos y Jimena. No pudimos escapar. Ayuda, por favor, alguien. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Covering every surface, layered over each other, some fresh enough to still show pale concrete beneath the scratches, others so old they had been worn almost smooth. The record of everyone who had been here before us. The testimony of the dead. I swept the light across the walls, reading what I could, trying to understand. Most were names and dates, some were prayers, some were apologies. One near the floor caught my attention and held it. El silencioso está esperando. No lo mires, no lo escuches, no le contestes. The silent one is waiting. Do not look at him. Do not listen to him. Do not answer him. The flashlight flickered. 3 times in quick succession, the beam stuttered like a heartbeat skipping. Then it went out completely, plunging us back into darkness. I pressed the button again. Nothing. I checked the battery. 67%, more than enough power. But the light would not turn on. I tried the screen. That worked fine. I tried the flashlight again. Nothing. Thomas pulled out his phone, activated his flashlight. It worked for perhaps 2 seconds before dying in exactly the same way. Lucia tried. Carolina tried. Same result every time. The phones worked. The cameras worked. The screens worked. But the lights, the things that could push back the darkness, refused to function. Something did not want to be seen. The breathing started again, closer now, right outside the bars of our cell. I could not see anything in the darkness, but I could feel it. A presence, a weight in the air, the sensation of being watched by something that had no eyes, or too many eyes, or eyes that existed in spectrums we were not built to perceive. Carolina pressed against me, her whole body trembling. I put my arm around her, pulled her close, tried to be the protector I'd always imagined myself being. But my arm was trembling too. My whole body was. We were all shaking, all 5 of us, vibrating with a fear that went deeper than thought, deeper than instinct, down to the level of cellular memory, the ancient knowledge that some things are simply wrong and should not be approached. Then the breathing stopped. The presence withdrew. And from the end of the corridor, from Rodrigo's cell, came a sound that turned my blood to ice. His voice, but not his voice. The words were Spanish, recognizable, formed by vocal cords I knew as well as my own. But the tone was wrong. The cadence was wrong. It was like someone had recorded Rodrigo speaking and was now playing the recording backward, while simultaneously slowing it down, stretching each syllable into something alien and terrible. "He is speaking," Valentina whispered. We all heard it. We all understood, and we all knew with a certainty that required no explanation that Rodrigo was not conscious. Rodrigo was lying on the floor of his cell, bleeding from his fall, unaware of anything. But something was using his mouth. Something was borrowing his voice. Something was sending us a message. I could not make out the words at first. They echoed through the corridor, distorted by distance and stone, blending together into a kind of drone. I moved closer to the bars, pressing my face against the cold metal, straining to hear. El Dice, the voice said. Rodrigo's voice. The thing wearing Rodrigo's voice. El Dice que ha esperado mucho tiempo. He says he has waited a long time. My stomach dropped. My knees went weak. I grabbed the bars to keep myself upright. The voice continued, and now I could hear it clearly, each word falling into the darkness like a stone into deep water. El dice que no son los primeros. El dice que muchos han venido antes. El dice que muchos se han quedado. He says you are not the first. He says many have come before. He says many have stayed. The word hung in the air, pregnant with meaning. I thought of the names on the walls, the dates, the prayers and apologies. All those people, all those messages, none of them had made it out. None of them had been found. They had stayed, just like the voice said, stayed in this prison, stayed in this darkness, stayed until they became part of the walls, part of the silence, part of whatever was speaking through my friend's unconscious body. Lucia was praying. I could hear her voice, barely a whisper, running through Hail Marys with the desperate speed of someone clinging to faith as a lifeline. Valentina had collapsed against the wall, her face blank, her eyes staring at nothing. Tomas was pulling at the bars again, uselessly, compulsively, unable to stop, even though he knew it would not help. Carolina looked at me. In the faint light from the window, I could see her face, and what I saw there broke something inside me. She was not crying. She was not panicking. She was simply waiting for me to do something, waiting for me to save her. Trusting me with a trust I did not deserve. I had to try something, anything. The car, I said, the keys, if we can get out, if we can get to the truck. No one responded, but I saw understanding flicker in their eyes. The truck was still outside. Rodrigo had the keys. If we could get out of this cell, get to Rodrigo, get the keys, maybe we could drive away from this place. Maybe we could find a road to town, a gas station with a working phone. Maybe we could survive. But first we had to get out. I examined the door more closely. The lock was old, rusted, the kind that required a physical key rather than any electronic mechanism. The hinges were on the outside, inaccessible. The bars were solid iron, thick as my wrist, set deep into the frame. There was no way to force it open, no way to break through. The window, Tomas said. He had stopped pulling at the door and was now looking at the small barred opening near the ceiling. It was barely large enough for a person to fit through, but the bars looked thinner than those on the door, older, more corroded. We need something to pry with, I said. There was nothing. The cell was empty except for us and the concrete platform and the hole in the floor. No furniture, no tools, nothing that could be used as a lever. Then I remembered my belt, thick leather with a heavy metal buckle. Not ideal, but better than nothing. I removed it and handed it to Thomas. He looped it around one of the window bars, twisted it tight and pulled. The bar groaned but did not move. He tried again, putting all his weight into it. The leather creaked. The buckle bit into the rust. And slowly, impossibly, the bar began to bend. It took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of pulling and resting and pulling again, of trading off, when our arms gave out, of listening to the sounds from Rodrigo's cell grow louder and more disturbing. The voice spoke intermittently, delivering fragments of information that made no sense and perfect sense at the same time. It talked about waiting, about hunger, about doors that opened only one way, about trades and prices and debts that could never be repaid. Finally, the bar came loose. Tomas pulled it free and immediately started working on the next one. We needed to remove at least 2 more to create an opening large enough to climb through. The voice stopped. The silence that followed was different from before, active rather than passive, waiting rather than empty. I felt it pressing against my skin, testing me, measuring me. Then, from somewhere in the darkness of the corridor, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. Not the footsteps of the man who had brought us here. Those had been heavy mechanical. These were lighter, more hesitant, like someone who was not entirely sure their legs would support them, like someone who had not walked in a very long time. We froze. Tomas stopped working on the bar. Carolina stopped breathing. Even Lucia's prayers went silent. The footsteps stopped directly outside our cell. I could see nothing. The darkness was absolute, impenetrable, resisting even the faint light from the window, but I could feel something there, inches from the bars, close enough to touch, if I had been mad enough to reach out. Then a voice spoke, not Rodrigo's voice, a different voice, older, rougher, the voice of someone whose throat had been damaged by screaming or by silence or by years of breathing air that was never meant for human lungs. 3 años, the voice said. 3 years? I waited. I could not have spoken even if I had wanted to. 3 años esperando, 3 años en la oscuridad, y ahora ustedes están aquí. 3 years waiting. 3 years in the darkness. And now you're here. A face appeared at the bars. I will never forget that face. Long and narrow, the skin stretched tight over the bones like paper over a frame. Eyes that were not eyes, just hollow sockets filled with shadow. A mouth that smiled without moving, a permanent rictus carved into flesh that had forgotten how to express anything else. And on the chest, visible through the tatters of what had once been clothing, a hole, a wound, an absence where a heart should have been black and bottomless like a door opening onto nothing. The figure raised one hand, placed it on the bars, and spoke again. Uno de ustedes tiene que quedarse, it said, para tomar mi lugar. One of you has to stay, to take my place. Behind me, Valentina screamed. The sound broke whatever spell had held us frozen. Tomas resumed his frantic work on the window bars. Lucia collapsed to her knees, her prayers now sobs. Carolina buried her face in my chest, unable to look. But I looked. I could not stop looking. The figure at the bars, the hole in its chest, the smile that was not a smile. I looked, and it looked back, and in that exchange something passed between us. Not words, not thoughts, just understanding. Cold and clear and absolute. This thing had been human once. It had been trapped here just like us. It had waited just like we were waiting. And it had died here in the darkness alone and forgotten. But death had not been an escape. Death had been a transformation. And now it wanted what all trapped things want. Freedom, at the cost of someone else's life. From the end of the corridor, Rodrigo's voice rose again, speaking words that were not his own, delivering a message that made my soul shrivel. Él dice que la puerta se abrirá, the voice said. Él dice que pueden irse, pero alguien tiene que quedarse. Alguien tiene que pagar el precio. He says the door will open. He says you can leave, but someone has to stay. Someone has to pay the price. The figure at the bar smiled wider, an impossible stretching of dead flesh, and waited for our answer. The figure did not move. It simply stood there, one hand resting on the bars, that impossible smile carved into its face, waiting with the patience of something that had already waited 3 years, and could wait 3 more if necessary. The hole in its chest seemed to pulse in the darkness, not with blood or breath, but with absence, a vacuum that pulled at something deeper than light. I forced myself to speak. My voice came out cracked, barely a whisper, but in the silence of that corridor it sounded like a shout. Who are you? The figure tilted its head, that bird-like movement I had seen the fake policeman make earlier, and I wondered briefly if they were connected, if this thing had somehow called us here through that man, if we had been chosen long before we ever climbed into Rodrigo's truck. Ignacio, the figure said. The word came out dry, rustling, like dead leaves scraping against stone. Me llamaba Ignacio, cuando todavía tenía nombre, cuando todavía era alguien. My name was Ignacio, when I still had a name, when I was still someone. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I understood what he was saying without needing it explained. This thing, this Ignacio, had been human once, had been alive, had been someone with a name and a history and people who loved him, and then he had ended up here in this prison, in this darkness. And whatever had happened to him in this place had stripped away everything that made him human until only this remained. This husk, this hunger, this smile that never moved. "What happened to you?" I asked. The question seemed to amuse him. His head tilted further an angle that would have been painful for a living neck, and a sound emerged from his throat that might have been laughter, if laughter could rot. "Lo mismo que les pasara a ustedes," he said. "Si no pagan el precio," the same thing that will happen to you, if you do not pay the price. Behind me, Valentina had stopped screaming. She stood against the far wall of the cell, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes fixed on Ignacio with an expression I had never seen on a human face before. It was not fear exactly. It was calculation. The look of someone running numbers in their head, weighing options, preparing to make a decision that would haunt them forever. "What price?" she said. Her voice was steady, terrifyingly steady. "Tell us exactly what you want." Ignacio's empty eye sockets turned toward her. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he raised his hand and pointed down the corridor toward the cell where Rodrigo lay. "Una vida," he said. "Una vida para tomar mi lugar. Una vida para abrir la puerta. One life to take my place. One life to open the door." The words fell into the silence like stones into a well, dropping down and down until they hit something at the bottom, something that had been waiting to receive them. I felt the impact in my chest, a physical sensation of weight settling onto my heart. One life. That was the price. One of us had to die so the others could live. "No," I said immediately. "No. There has to be another way." Ignacio shook his head slowly, that terrible smile never wavering. "No hay otra manera," he said. "Yo busqué. Durante 3 años busqué. No hay puertas. No hay ventanas que funcionen. No hay túneles. No hay escape. Solo el intercambio. Solo el precio. There is no other way." I searched. For 3 years I searched. No doors, no windows that worked, no tunnels, no escape. Only the exchange. Only the price. 3 years. He had been trapped here for 3 years, searching for a way out, finding nothing. 3 years of darkness and silence, and that hole in his chest growing larger, consuming more of what had once been human until only this remained. And now he was offering us a deal. A terrible deal. A deal that required us to become murderers. Tomas had stopped working on the window bars. He stood frozen, the belt still wrapped around the metal, staring at Ignacio with an expression of dawning horror. "You want us to kill one of our friends," he said. "That is what you are asking." Ignacio's head turned toward him. "No los estoy pidiendo que maten," he said. "Solo que elijan. La muerte vendrá sola. Solo tienen que decidir quién. I am not asking you to kill, only to choose. Death will come on its own. You only have to decide who. Choose." That word was worse than kill. Killing implied action, intent, responsibility. Choosing implied something else, something passive. Something that allowed you to pretend your hands were clean even as blood pooled around your feet. I looked at the others. Lucia had stopped crying, her face blank with shock. Carolina clung to my arm, her nails digging into my skin hard enough to draw blood. Tomas stood rigid, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists. And Valentina, who had already begun to calculate. Valentina, who was looking at each of us in turn, measuring, evaluating, deciding. Her eyes settled on the end of the corridor, on Rodrigo's cell. "Him," she said. The word came out flat without emotion, like a judge delivering a verdict. "Valentina," I started. She cut me off. "Think about it," she said. Her voice was still steady, still terrifyingly calm. "He brought us here. He took his father's truck without permission. He drove drunk. He chose the free road. He ran from the police instead of stopping. Every single decision that led us to this place was his decision. If anyone deserves to pay, it is him." "That is not how it works," I said. "We cannot just decide that someone deserves to die." Then what do you suggest? She turned on me, and for the first time I saw the fear beneath her calm. It was there in her eyes, in the slight tremor of her hands, in the way her voice cracked on the last word. We stay here. We wait until we die of thirst or starvation or whatever happens when that thing decides we have taken too long. My grandmother is dying, Mateo. She is dying right now in a hospital bed waiting for me, and I will not let her die alone because of some drunk idiot who thought he was invincible. She is right. The words came from Lucia, my sister, the person who had known me longest, who had shared a home with me for 22 years, who I thought I understood better than anyone. She is right, Lucia repeated. Her voice was quiet but firm. Rodrigo made the choices that brought us here. He should be the one to pay. I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. This was my sister, the person who had cried when our childhood dog died. The person who volunteered at a soup kitchen every Christmas. The person who I had always believed was fundamentally, unshakably good. Lucia, I said, you cannot be serious. She would not meet my eyes. I do not want to die here, Mateo, she said. I do not want any of us to die here. But if someone has to... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Tomas said nothing. He had turned away from us, his forehead pressed against the bars of the window, his shoulders shaking. Whether he was crying or praying or simply trying to escape what was happening, I could not tell. Carolina looked up at me. Her eyes were wet, her face pale, but she did not speak. She did not need to. The question was written in her expression, in the way she held on to me, in the slight tilt of her head toward the corridor where Rodrigo lay. She was asking me what I would do. She was asking me who I would choose. She was asking me if I would let her die to save a friend who had already condemned us all. I looked at Ignacio. He stood motionless at the bars, that smile still carved into his face, those empty eyes still watching. He had not moved. He had not spoken. He was simply waiting, as he had waited for 3 years, for someone to make the choice that would set him free, and I understood in that moment what he truly was. Not a ghost, not a demon, not any of the monsters from the stories I had heard as a child. He was something worse. He was a mirror, a reflection of what we were capable of becoming when survival stripped away everything else. He had been human once, and then he had been trapped, and then he had been desperate, and then he had been willing to do anything to escape, just like us, just like we were becoming. The only difference was that his transformation was complete. Ours was just beginning. I need to think, I said. Give me time to think. Ignacio's head tilted. El tiempo es lo único que no tienen, he said. El amanecer viene. Y cuando legue la luz del sol, la puerta se cierra. Para siempre. Time is the only thing you do not have. Dawn is coming, and when the sunlight arrives, the door closes. Forever. Dawn. How long until dawn? 3 hours 4. We had left the party at 1:35, driven for nearly an hour before being stopped, followed the fake policeman for another 40 minutes. It had to be close to 4 in the morning by now. We had maybe 2 hours, perhaps less, before the sun rose, and whatever window of opportunity existed slammed shut. 2 hours to make an impossible decision. 2 hours to choose between murder and death. 2 hours to discover what we truly were beneath the masks we wore for the world. I need to see Rodrigo, I said. Ignacio stepped aside, a single fluid movement that seemed to fold space rather than traverse it. The path to Rodrigo's cell was clear. I looked at the others. Stay here, I said. Valentina opened her mouth to protest, but something in my expression stopped her. I walked to the bars of our cell, and as I approached, I heard a sound that made my skin crawl. The lock clicking open. The door swinging inward just enough for me to pass through. Ignacio had not touched it. No one had touched it. It had simply opened as if the prison itself was inviting me deeper into its depths. I stepped into the corridor. The darkness here was different from the darkness in the cell, thicker, more active. It pressed against my skin, slid into my mouth and nose when I breathed, filled my eyes with shapes that were not quite visible. but not quite imaginary either. I walked slowly, one hand trailing along the wall, feeling the scratches and carvings beneath my fingers. More names, more dates, more prayers from people who had not been saved. Rodrigo's cell was at the end of the corridor. The door stood open, revealing a space identical to the one I had just left. Concrete platform, hole in the floor, walls covered in the desperate messages of the dead, and Rodrigo. He lay on his back in the center of the cell, his eyes closed, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Blood had pooled beneath his head, black in the darkness, spreading outward in a shape that looked almost deliberate, almost like a symbol. His face was peaceful, unmarked by the horror that surrounded us. Whatever was using his voice had not damaged the vessel. It had simply borrowed it the way you might borrow a telephone to make a call. I knelt beside him. "Rodrigo," I said, "can you hear me?" No response, not even a flicker of movement behind his closed eyelids. "Rodrigo, it is Mateo. Please, wake up." Still nothing. He was breathing, but he was not there. His body was present, but whatever made him Rodrigo had retreated somewhere deep, somewhere safe, somewhere the thing that had spoken through him could not reach. Or maybe it could reach everywhere. Maybe there was no safe place. Maybe that was the point. I sat back on my heels and looked at my friend who had driven drunk, my friend who had chosen the free road, my friend who had made every wrong decision it was possible to make and had brought us all to this place as a result. My friend who was 23 years old, who had a father who loved him, who had a girlfriend waiting in the cell behind me, who had dreams and fears and a whole life ahead of him that would be erased if I stayed silent. The arithmetic was simple. 1 life for 5, 1 death to prevent 5 deaths, 1 sacrifice to save everyone else. It was the kind of calculation that philosophers debated in hypotheticals, the trolley problem made flesh, made real, made immediate. And the answer, when you looked at it rationally, was obvious. But I was not looking at a number. I was looking at Rodrigo. At the curve of his jaw, which I had seen 1,000 times across countless parties and dinners and lazy afternoons, at his hands, which had helped me move apartments twice, at his chest rising and falling, still alive, still breathing, still holding on to a future that I had the power to take away. The soul is not equipped for such mathematics. The heart does not understand arithmetic. And in that moment, kneeling beside my unconscious friend in a prison cell that should not exist, I understood why people broke under pressure. It was not weakness. It was the weight of impossible choices pressing down until something inside you simply gave way. I do not know how long I knelt there. Minutes maybe, or hours. Time had lost its meaning in that place, stretched and compressed by forces I did not understand. But eventually I became aware of a presence behind me. Ignacio. He stood in the doorway of the cell, that smile still carved into his face, those empty eyes still watching. But something had changed. He seemed more substantial now, more present, as if my proximity to Rodrigo had somehow strengthened him. "He was a good person," Ignacio said. I looked up. "What el hombre que tomó mi lugar," Ignacio continued. "Era buena persona. Tenía familia. Tenía sueños. Pero cuando llegó el momento de elegir, eligió vivir, como todos eligen, como tú elegirás." The man who took my place, he was a good person, he had a family, he had dreams, but when the moment came to choose, he chose to live, as everyone chooses, as you will choose. I shook my head. "I am not like you," I said. "I will not become what you became." Ignacio laughed, that dry rustling sound that scraped against my nerves like sandpaper. "Eso es lo que él dijo también," Ignacio replied. "Antes de que me señalara, antes de que dijera mi nombre, antes de que la puerta se abriera y él caminara libre mientras yo me quedaba aquí esperando, pudriéndome, convirtiéndome en esto." That is what he said too. Before he pointed at me, before he spoke my name, before the door opened and he walked free while I stayed here waiting, rotting, becoming this. I stared at him, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. "Someone chose you," I said. "Someone sacrificed you to escape." Ignacio nodded slowly. "Éramos 7, he said. siete amigos atrapados aquí igual que ustedes. Y cuando llegó el momento, 6 de ellos decidieron que yo era prescindible. 6 de ellos me miraron a los ojos y dijeron mi nombre. Y la puerta se abrió, y se fueron, y yo me quedé. There were 7 of us, 7 friends trapped here just like you. And when the moment came, 6 of them decided I was expendable. 6 of them looked me in the eyes and spoke my name, and the door opened, and they left, and I stayed. 7 friends, 6 survivors, 1 sacrifice. The math was the same, the outcome was the same. The only thing that changed was the faces. Why are you still here, I asked. If they left? Why did you not move on? Ignacio's smile seemed to widen, though his face did not move. Porque así funcionan las reglas, he said. Una vida entra, una vida sale, pero la vida que entra no se va hasta que otra vida la reemplace. No hay cielo aquí, no hay infierno, solo la espera, solo el hambre, solo la oscuridad hasta que alguien nuevo viene a tomar tu lugar. Because that is how the rules work. One life enters, one life exits. But the life that enters does not leave until another life replaces it. There is no heaven here. There is no hell. Only the waiting, only the hunger, only the darkness until someone new comes to take your place. The rules. As if this place operated on logic, on cause and effect, on principles that could be understood and predicted. But there was nothing logical about any of this. Nothing that made sense. Just horror stacked on horror choice, stacked on impossible choice, until the weight became unbearable. A sound from behind me. Footsteps. I turned to see Valentina standing in the corridor, her face pale but determined. "We have decided," she said. I stood up. "You have decided what?" She looked at Rodrigo, then at me, then at Ignacio. Her jaw was set, her eyes hard. "Rodrigo," she said. "It has to be Rodrigo." I felt something crack inside me, some last remnant of hope or faith or belief in human goodness that had survived everything else. "Valentina," I said, "he is your boyfriend." She flinched, just slightly, just for a moment. Then the hardness returned. "He was my boyfriend," she said, "but I cannot save him. I can only save myself. And my grandmother needs me. My family needs me. I will not die in this place for someone who cannot even wake up to fight for his own life." I looked past her down the corridor. The others had emerged from the cell and stood huddled together, their faces ghost pale in the darkness. Lucia would not meet my eyes. Tomas stared at the floor. Carolina looked at me with an expression that begged for forgiveness she had not yet earned. They had voted. While I was kneeling beside Rodrigo searching for another way, they had held their own private tribunal and delivered their verdict. "You cannot do this," I said. "This is murder." "It is survival," Valentina shot back, "and I will not apologize for wanting to live." She turned to Ignacio. "We agree," she said. "Rodrigo, take Rodrigo." Ignacio's head tilted. "Todos deben estar de acuerdo," he said. "O al menos, nadie debe objetar. Everyone must agree, or at least no one must object." All eyes turned to me. The weight of their gazes was physical, pressing down on my shoulders, my chest, my lungs. 5 people waiting for me to condemn my friend or condemn them all. 5 people who had already made their choice and needed me to validate it. 5 people who would hate me if I refused and never forgive themselves if I agreed. I thought of Rodrigo lying unconscious behind me. I thought of Carolina standing before me, her eyes pleading. I thought of my sister, who had always been my moral compass and had now pointed toward darkness. I thought of my own life, all the things I had not done, all the words I had not spoken, all the dreams I had not chased, because I was waiting for some day, and some day had finally arrived in the worst possible form. And I thought of Ignacio, of the man he had been before this place consumed him, of the moment when his friends looked him in the eyes and spoke his name, of the 3 years he had spent in darkness, waiting, becoming this. If I refused, would I become him? Would I spend years in this prison watching my humanity erode until I was nothing but hunger and patience and that terrible carved smile? The silence stretched. Seconds became hours. The darkness pressed in. "Mateo," Carolina's voice small and broken, "please." I looked at her. At the woman I loved, or thought I loved, or wanted to love if I ever found the courage. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, her whole body trembling. She was terrified. They all were, and they were looking to me to save them, even though saving them meant destroying someone else. Something shifted inside me. Not a decision exactly, more like a surrender, a giving up of something I had always believed was essential, some core of myself that I had thought was unbreakable. It was not unbreakable. It was shattering now, right now in this moment, and I could feel the pieces falling away, leaving behind something hollow, something cold, something that could make the choice they needed me to make. I closed my eyes. "I am sorry," I whispered. The words were not meant for them. They were meant for Rodrigo, who could not hear them, for the man he would never become, for the life I was about to take without lifting a finger. I opened my eyes and looked at Ignacio. "I do not object," I said. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. They felt like knives in my throat, but they were out now, spoken, irrevocable. I had made my choice. Or rather, I had failed to unmake the choice that others had made for me. The difference felt meaningless. Ignacio nodded slowly. That smile, if possible, grew wider. "Está hecho," he said. "The price is paid." For a moment, nothing happened. The darkness remained. The silence remained. We stood frozen in the corridor, waiting for something, though none of us knew what. Then, the gunshot. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere, a crack of thunder that shook the walls and rattled the bars, and sent dust raining from the ceiling. I spun towards Rodrigo's cell, my heart seizing in my chest, and saw him. He was still lying on his back. His eyes were still closed. His face was still peaceful. But his chest was no longer rising and falling. His chest had a hole in it now, a wound that had appeared from nothing, that had been inflicted by no weapon I could see. A hole exactly the same size and shape as the one in Ignacio's chest. Blood spread beneath him faster than physics should allow, pooling and spreading until the entire floor of the cell was red. And then, slowly, impossibly, Rodrigo opened his eyes. They were not his eyes. They were empty, hollow. Two pits of shadow in a face that had been my friend's face and was now something else entirely. He sat up. The movement was wrong, mechanical, like a marionette being jerked upright by invisible strings. Blood poured from the hole in his chest, but he did not seem to notice. He did not seem to feel anything at all. His head turned toward us, toward me, and he smiled. That same smile, the carved rictus, the expression that was not an expression, the mark of what he had become. "Gracias," Rodrigo's mouth said, but the voice was not Rodrigo's. It was Ignacio's. "Gracias por liberarme." Thank you for freeing me. I turned to where Ignacio had been standing. He was gone, vanished, as if he had never existed at all, but something else had taken his place. The doors of the cells were open, all of them, swinging slowly on their hinges, creaking in a wind that had not existed moments before. And beyond them, at the end of the corridor, the main door of the prison stood ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness that was somehow different from the darkness inside. Outside darkness, real darkness. The darkness of a world that still had a sun waiting to rise. Run. I do not know who said it. Maybe Valentina, maybe Lucia. Maybe it was just the voice in my own head screaming at me to move, to flee, to escape this place before it claimed me too. We ran. Through the corridor, past the open cells, past the thing that had been Rodrigo and was now sitting upright in its pool of blood, smiling that terrible smile. Past the scratched walls and the carved names and the prayers of the dead. Past the smell of mold and rot and old death. Past everything running without thought, without direction, driven by pure animal terror. The main door loomed ahead. I hit it at full speed, shoulder first, and it flew open, spilling me out into the courtyard. Rain hit my face, cold and sharp. Wind tore at my clothes. Lightning flickered overhead, illuminating the prison behind me for a split second, a monument to suffering rendered in crumbly brick and rusted iron. The others followed. Valentina first, then Lucia, then Tomas, then Carolina. 5 of us bursting into the night, 5 of us fleeing the 6th, who was no longer one of us. The truck was still there, still parked where Rodrigo had left it. Keys, presumably still in his pocket, which meant still inside the prison, which meant we could not use it. We had to run, and so we ran. Across the courtyard, through the broken gate, down the muddy road that had brought us here. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, my heart pounded so hard I thought it might explode. But I did not stop. None of us stopped. We ran as if our lives depended on it because they did, because staying meant becoming what Rodrigo had become, what Ignacio had been, what this place turned everyone who lingered too long. I do not know how far we ran. Miles, maybe, or minutes. Distance and time had merged into a single desperate blur of movement and fear. At some point the rain stopped. At some point the road became paved. At some point the trees fell away and we were standing on the shoulder of a highway, gasping for breath, covered in mud and blood and things we did not want to name. Dawn was breaking. The sky to the east had turned gray, then pink, then gold. The first rays of sunlight touched our faces, warm and impossibly gentle after the cold of the prison. Birds began to sing somewhere nearby, ordinary birds singing ordinary songs as if the night had been nothing but a bad dream. But it had not been a dream. The mud on our clothes was real. The scratches on our arms were real. The absence where Rodrigo should have been standing was real. And the silence, the terrible, heavy silence that had fallen over our group, the silence of people who had done something that could never be undone. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. We stood on the side of the highway, 5 survivors of something that should not have been survived, and we waited for the world to find us. The police found us at 7 in the morning, wandering along the highway like ghosts who had forgotten how to die. 5 young people covered in mud and dried blood, our eyes hollow, our voices gone. They asked questions we could not answer. They demanded explanations we could not give. In the end, we told them fragments, kidnapped, lost, escaped. The truth was too impossible to speak, too heavy to carry into the light of day. They took us to a hospital, examined us, documented our wounds. The gash on my knee required 12 stitches. Carolina's arm bore 3 deep scratches that no one could explain. Valentina had bruises on her wrists from gripping the cell bars. Tomas would not stop shaking for 3 days. We were released that afternoon. Valentina went straight to see her grandmother. I never learned if she made it in time. Some questions you do not ask because the answers would only add weight to what you already carry. Lucia and I went home together. Our parents were frantic, had been calling all night. We gave them the same nothing we gave the police: kidnapped, lost, escaped. They held us and cried and asked what happened to Rodrigo, and we said we did not know. We said he disappeared. We said we tried to find him but could not. The lies came easier than I expected. That terrified me more than anything. 1 week after we escaped, I found something that should not have existed. I had been avoiding my backpack since we returned. It sat in the corner of my room, still caked with mud, still smelling of that prison of mold and rain, and something I refused to name. But that morning I forced myself to open it, to reclaim some sense of normalcy, to pretend the past week had been nothing but a fever dream. In the smallest pocket, the one I never used there, was a piece of paper, old, yellowed, brittle at the edges as if it had been waiting for decades rather than days. I unfolded it with trembling hands. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, written by fingers that had forgotten how to grip a pen. But the words were clear. Gracias por tomar mi lugar, nos vemos pronto. Thank you for taking my place, see you soon. Below the message, a signature, Ignacio, and a date. March 15th, 2016, 3 years before the night we were trapped. The paper fell from my hands. I could not breathe. That afternoon the police went back to the prison. They had finally believed enough of our story to investigate. They found the place exactly where we described it, at the end of a nameless road surrounded by trees that seemed to recoil from its walls. They found one body. In the cell across from where we had been held, slumped against the wall, they discovered a skeleton, male, adult, dead for at least 3 years, according to the coroner. Cause of death unclear, but there was evidence of severe malnutrition, dehydration, and something else that defied explanation. A hole in the chest directly over the heart with no corresponding damage to the surrounding bones. His identification was still in his pocket. Ignacio Delgado, reported missing in March 2016. The thing that had spoken to us. The thing that had offered us the deal. Dead for 3 years before we ever set foot in that prison. Of Rodrigo, there was no trace. His blood covered the floor of the cell at the end of the corridor. Enough blood that survival should have been impossible. But no body, no remains. Nothing to prove he had ever existed at all. The case remains open, missing person, presumed dead. But I know the truth. Rodrigo is not missing. Rodrigo is exactly where we left him in that cell, in that darkness, waiting for the next group of travelers to lose their way, waiting to offer them the same deal that was offered to us. Last night I woke at 2:15 in the morning, the exact time we were stopped on that road 5 years ago. I heard a sound, soft but unmistakable. The click of a door handle being tested. Once, twice, 3 times. I lay frozen, heart pounding, unable to move. The clicking stopped. Silence returned. I told myself it was nothing. The house settling, the wind. My imagination still raw after all these years. In the morning I checked the front door. Still locked. Nothing disturbed. But on the floor just inside the threshold there was a puddle of water. Small but distinct, as if someone had been standing there dripping, waiting to be let in. It had not rained that night. And when I looked in the mirror this morning for just a fraction of a second, my reflection smiled before I did. I am telling you this story not because I want sympathy, not because I need to be believed. I am telling you because somewhere out there on roads that have no names, in places that appear on no maps, there are prisons waiting. There are things that were once human waiting. There are deals waiting to be offered and prices waiting to be paid. If you're ever driving late at night on a road you do not recognize and you see lights flashing behind you, do not stop. Do not follow. Do not let them take you to a place where the only way out is through someone else's death. Because I made a choice that night. I stayed silent when silence meant murder. And now, every night at 2:15, I hear the clicking. Every morning I find the water. Every time I look in the mirror, I wonder if today is the day my reflection stops obeying me entirely. The curse did not end when we escaped. It only changed addresses. And I think sometimes that Rodrigo is getting impatient. So if you have made it this far, if you have heard my story and believed even a fraction of it, I have one question for you. Have you ever encountered something you could not explain on a dark road? Have you ever felt watched by something that was not there? Have you ever made a choice that haunts you? Still tell me. I want to know. Because the thing about curses is that they spread, they jump from person to person, story to story, like a fire looking for fuel. And maybe if I can pass this one on, I can finally be free. Or maybe that is just what the prison wants me to think. I guess we will find out together.